Our last witness is Haras Rafiq, who's chief executive of the Quilliam Foundation, which is a counter-extremism organisation, and he's on the line from Salford now. Mr. Rafiq, I suppose there are two ways of looking at these people. They're either psychopaths or they're theologians. Which do you think?
I think they're neither and both. The World Bank did a survey of foreign fighters in Iraq and Syria about a year and a half ago, and they found that the overwhelming majority of them had a better social standing and a better education than the national averages of the countries that they come from. Let's not forget that the current leader of Al-Qaeda, Zawahiri, is a surgeon. Bin Laden was an engineer, etc., etc. This is an ideological position that people take to join groups like ISIS, and anybody and everybody can be vulnerable in inverted commas. I remember going to prison one time with a leading imam, and we went to do a presentation, and he was asked to go and speak to somebody who was a convicted terrorist. He went in the same colour as me, and he came out very, very pale, and I asked him, what's the matter? And he turned round to me and said, the guy's got a point. He went in with his theological position and claims that he won the theological argument. But the guy hit him with the intellectual, the ideological, the social and the emotional, and the imam had nothing. It's a combination of both of those and much more.
Micheal Buerk.
In the light of that consideration, Mr. Rafiq, what do you think, very simply and briefly if you could, what would be the beginnings of your recipe to stop others following in the footsteps of Shamima Begum?
My apologies, sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Yes, what would be your recipe, very broadly and briefly, if you could, for to stop others following in the footsteps of Shamima Begum?
Look, there are three parts to it. There's the actual stopping people from becoming terrorists, so there's the counter-terrorism element. There is an element where you actually have people who show sympathy, empathy and support for these kind of groups. There is a form of de-radicalisation and rehabilitation. But the biggest area really that we as a civil society need to focus on is the ideology of Islamism as opposed to Islam, because there is a big difference, and actually build resilience amongst our communities so people don't get radicalised in the first place.
And would bringing her back help or hinder that last point? If you want to show that Islamism, hardline Islamism, is so damaging, is it not better off to have her back and the whole thing carried out, the legal and the moral debate around it with her in this country?
I think it's a bit like Brexit, this question, because there are a lot of... Yeah, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you for why. There are lots of people who voted for Brexit with their heart. They didn't really fully understand what the intellectual arguments were. And then there were people who voted with their brains and perhaps voted a different way. Our society right now... It is
possible the other way around, but that's another show. Let's get back quickly, please.
So what we have currently is we have a lot of people from an emotional perspective who are saying we don't want her back, we don't want her back. But from an intellectual and moral perspective, it is very, very important to bring her back, take her through the due process, and then actually put her through a de-radicalisation and rehabilitation programme that can work. But it doesn't work for everybody, but it can work.
Right. And one thing I wondered, particularly, going back to your very interesting story about that meeting between the imam and the prisoner, do you think Shamima Begum is, in the end, a sort of product of what she's been through? That seemed to be a bit of a theme from certainly our first witness tonight. Or did she make a moral choice?
She made a moral and ideological choice to do this. One of the previous witnesses actually likened this to the grooming gang cases. There is a big difference. The girls in Rochdale, my hometown, and Rotherham and other places were plied with alcohol. They were actually put on drugs. There were a whole bunch of different things. They were let down by a whole bunch of people. These girls, in this instance, were radicalised through osmosis because there were marches with Anjem Chowdhury that one of these girls' fathers took her to when she was 13. There's lots of video footage of that everywhere. So they were let down initially by their parents, but then after that they made an intelligent ideological choice to look for this ideology, to look for this kind of worldview, and then get on a plane, leave their parents and leave everybody. And in this instance, Shamima still doesn't regret it. And she actually, there's one question that she was asked by the Times which gave so much away. When she was asked, do you think that this is the end of the Caliphate? And she said, I don't have high hopes for it anymore, which tells me that ideologically and from a theological and ideological perspective, she still hasn't disavowed the ideas that took her there in the first place.
Giles Fraser?
I guess it's hard to disavow them when you're still in a camp surrounded by many people who might harm you if you said otherwise.
Not necessarily, because at the end of the day, she's in a camp where she's currently, the whole world's view. The whole world is looking at the gaze is there from everybody. She wants to get back here. So whoever's given her the advice to do this in the first place, I think, was the wrong advice. So whoever that may happen to be. But she's protected. She's not roaming around a camp with ISIS people looking to kill her. She's there amongst people who want to get out of the country.
Anthony Lloyd, who interviewed her, called it a mini caliphate, that camp.
But there are all people that want to leave. There aren't people there who want to stay in that camp. So it's relatively easy. I mean, she was part of... It was reported at the time that she was part of the Al-Khanza Brigade. I don't know if you know who they are, Giles. They're the women that were actually trained, and this is by people on the ground at the time. These are people who have been trained by ISIS to look for other people, other women, the morality police, to go out and have them whipped and a whole bunch of other things. So, they know how to behave in these situations, and she's a bit of a royalty within that camp.
So there's lots of things that she's being accused of. Don't you think she should just have that tested before a court of law? I mean, rather than done in the media. So we don't agree about that.
No, I agree that it should be tested, and I agree that she should go through the due process, and then she should actually, if found guilty, then do whatever the time is that she's allocated by a judge.
And do you think there's a possibility of redemption for people like this?
Look, yes, I do, and I'll tell you for why. Because our current president, Numan bin Notman, is somebody who used to be a commander under Osama bin Laden, fighting against the Soviets. We have our founder who was in prison in Egypt for 5 years for trying to set up an Islamist, to recruit for Islamism. We have other people who fought in theatres around the world. We've worked with people around the world. Yes, if you focus on the ideology, yes, if you focus on all the other aspects that I talked about earlier, yes, people can be mentored out of these positions, but they've got to want to be taken through this journey in the first place.
I'm interested in what a radical is. I mean, I believe my faith is more important than my commitment to this country. Does that make me a radical?
If it doesn't actually put you in line with the rule of law, if it doesn't put you in line with breaking... If your faith, and your, in inverted commas, radical faith, tells you to go and break the Terrorism 2006 Act, then it does.
But if you're not breaking the law, this is just a deeply conservative religious culture which has politicised elements that have been politicised perhaps by war on terror and so forth. That may be...
Giles, I don't hold that argument. I'll tell you why. What is the war on terror? What has our foreign policy got to do with European Muslims, including Brits, flying thousands of miles to go and kill other Muslims and take Yazidi sex slaves? That's a red herring. The foreign policy and the war on terror and all these things can be a recruiting sergeant, but nobody travels all that way to kill other Muslims because of something that our government might do.
Haras Rafiq, thank you.